is Fox 45 News at 5.
Fox 45 is following two big criminal investigations in the Baltimore area.
In Baltimore County, a community in shock after two siblings are found shot to death in their Gwynn Oak home.
And in Harford County, the sheriff's office sheds new light on their investigation into a weekend shooting at a house party in Falston. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kai Jackson.
I'm Myrie Bubala. We begin with the deaths of a brother and sister found shot to death inside their home. Overnight and throughout today, detectives have been scouring the scene and surrounding area to kickstart their investigation. And now we're hearing from area residents who are just realizing the scale of this tragedy.
Fox 45's Alexa Ashwell is following the early stages of the investigation. She's live near the scene right now.
7:20 p.m. A mother steps through her own front door on an ordinary Thursday, and the house is wrong before she even knows why. No music. No arguing over the remote, just a stillness that doesn't belong in a home with two kids in it. An hour before that moment, a teenage boy got off a public bus half a mile away and started walking unhurried, like he'd done it a dozen times before. He had. This wasn't a stranger closing in on a house he'd never seen. It was someone who already had a key into these kids' lives. 60 minutes. That's the entire window. By the time cameras picked him back up, he was walking the other direction, catching a different bus, heading back into the city with no rush, no backward glance, like he was returning from nothing more than a visit. Inside that hour, a 15-year-old girl and her 9-year-old brother stopped being two kids who loved Roblox and karate and golf, and became a case number. A threat someone had made weeks earlier, one that a friend actually heard with her own ears, turned out to be less of a warning and more of a promise. By the time investigators pieced together the texts, the bus footage, and the timeline down to the minute, they weren't asking whether this boy did it. They were asking how a relationship that started with FaceTime calls ended with two children dead in their own home. Quick heads up before we dive in, this case involves the deaths of two children, and parts of it are difficult to sit with. Take care of yourself, and skip ahead if you need to. If this is your first time here, subscribe to our channel Crime Stories 1 so you don't miss what's coming next, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's rewind to where this actually started. Talas Road sits in Gwynn Oak, a working Baltimore County neighborhood where houses are close enough that people know each other by name, not just by face. It is not a place that makes headlines. Most days there, nothing does. In one of those houses lived a mother raising two kids, holding a job and a household together at the same time, with family and neighbors filling in where they could. Her oldest was Giovanna Myrie, known to almost everyone as Gigi. She was 15, a student at Western High School, and she split her free time between golf and karate, two activities that reward discipline over flash. People who knew her point to the same thing again and again. She was composed. Not withdrawn, just someone who did not need to perform for a room. Friends describe her as the one who kept her circle level-headed, not the other way around. Teachers at Western knew her as reliable, someone who showed up and did the work without being chased for it. Her younger brother, Steve Allen, was 9, with his 10th birthday just weeks away. His family called him Pops, a name he had apparently carried long enough that nobody remembers exactly how it started. He spent his summer the way most 9-year-olds do, chasing Roblox updates and basketball highlights, but the people closest to him say what actually mattered to him was simpler than that. He liked being home. He liked being around his mother and his sister, and he made sure people knew it. That was the shape of their household that July. A working mother, a disciplined teenager building her own routines, a 9-year-old counting down to double digits. Nothing about any of it suggested urgency, and nothing about Gwynn Oak that summer suggested it either. What changed things did not come from inside that house, and it did not come from the neighborhood around it. It came from somewhere Gigi's mother could not see and would not have reason to check, because at 15, that kind of privacy is usually just called growing up. Somewhere around the middle of that summer, Gigi started talking to a boy named Keith Maurice James Jr. He was 16, living across the city line in West Baltimore, and by every account, the two of them had never crossed paths in any ordinary way. No shared school, no shared neighborhood, no obvious overlap in their daily lives. What connected them was a phone. Texting first, then FaceTime, calls that could stretch late into the evening without either of them leaving their own bedroom. There was no introduction through family, no mutual friend vouching for him at the start. Just two names appearing on each other's screens, a relationship built almost entirely out of typed messages and a camera lens. Gigi's mother had no reason to know it was happening because there was nothing to see. No visits yet, no name mentioned at dinner, just a phone lighting up in another room. One person did know, though. A close friend of Gigi's had been on FaceTime calls with the two of them more than once, close enough to the relationship to know its rhythm. And on July 4th, that friend was there for something more than a call. During a three-way FaceTime, she watched the two of them together, and later that same day, she saw them in person, face to face, at Gigi's own house. From where anyone outside the house could see, it looked like nothing at all. A 16-year-old visiting on a holiday afternoon, the kind of thing that happens on porches up and down Tallis Road without a second glance. 2 months of texting had turned into an actual visit, the natural next step for two teenagers who had only known each other through a screen. But that same July 4th call would end up mattering more than anyone realized at the time. Something happened on it that Gigi's friend would not be able to shake and would not stay quiet about once it mattered most. During that same July 4th FaceTime call, Gigi's friend saw something that had nothing to do with a normal teenage relationship. James was holding a handgun while he was with Gigi, visible on camera, not hidden, not explained away. For a call between two teenagers, it was a detail that did not fit anywhere into an ordinary afternoon. It was on that same call that the tone shifted. According to the friend, James said something to Gigi about what would happen if she ever moved on to someone else. Not a passing comment, not the kind of jealous remark teenagers toss around and forget by morning. A direct threat, specific enough that the friend remembered it clearly enough to repeat it to investigators weeks later. At the time, it would have been easy to write off. A teenager with a gun in frame and a threat in his mouth can look like bravado, the kind of thing said to sound serious rather than be serious. That is usually the safer assumption, and it is usually the right one. It was not the right one here. When investigators later gained access to Gigi's phone, they found a message that lined up with exactly what the friend had described. Not a similar sentiment, not something in the same spirit. The actual content of the threat, preserved in writing, sitting on her phone the entire time. What the friend remembered was not just a memory. It was documented, sent directly to Gigi, and it had been there since the moment it arrived. That single detail would carry more weight in this case than almost anything else investigators uncovered. A threat spoken out loud is one person's word against another's. A threat typed out and sent, sitting untouched on a phone for weeks, does not fade with memory and does not soften with hindsight. It simply waits. 3 days after that July 4th call, Gigi would talk to her friend one more time. July 7th started the way most Mondays did that summer. Gigi's mother left for work around 7 in the morning, the same routine she followed most weekdays, trusting her two kids to fill the hours the way they usually did on a school break. There was nothing about that morning that stood out. No argument, no unusual plan, no reason to think twice before walking out the door. Throughout the day, the household ran on its normal rhythm. Steve had his games, his basketball, the small comforts of a 9-year-old summer, the kind of day that would have looked identical to a dozen others before it. Gigi had her own routine, one that by now included regular contact with Keith James, texts and calls threaded through her day the way they had been for weeks. Around 4 in the afternoon, Gigi's mother heard from her daughter. It was brief, the kind of check-in that happens dozens of times over a summer and means nothing in the moment it is sent. Neither of them had reason to treat it as anything other than routine. It would turn out to be the last contact between them. That same afternoon, Gigi told her friend that Keith was coming by later. She said it plainly, the way you would mention any expected visitor. He had been to the house before, most recently on July 4th, so there was nothing about the plan that read as new or worth a second thought. That message is the last normal thing anyone would hear from her. From here, the timeline stops running on ordinary rhythm and starts running on evidence, cell phone records, surveillance footage, minutes and locations pieced together afterward by people who were not there to witness it, only to reconstruct what happened once it already had. What happened over the next hour would later be reconstructed almost entirely from cameras and cell towers, not from anyone who witnessed it directly. That is what makes this stretch of the timeline different from everything before it. Nobody was telling this part of the story from memory. It was being pieced together after the fact, frame by frame. Just after 4 in the afternoon, surveillance cameras picked up Keith James stepping off a public MTA bus, roughly half a mile from Gigi's house. The footage did not show someone wandering, killing time, or unsure of where he was headed. It showed a young man walking directly toward the neighborhood with clear intent, along a route that led straight to Tallis Road. Cell phone data tied to James placed a device in the same area during that same window, corroborating what the cameras were already showing. Around an hour later, different cameras picked him up again. This time, he was leaving. According to investigators, he appeared to be wearing a mask, and he took a different bus route back into the city than the one that had brought him out. Coming and going are rarely treated the same way in an investigation like this, and the difference here would not go unnoticed. Arriving openly on a known route and leaving deliberately altered on a different one is the kind of detail that reshapes how investigators read everything else surrounding it. Somewhere inside that hour, a neighbor nearby heard something loud, something that did not belong in an otherwise ordinary afternoon. At the time, there was no way to know what it meant. It registered only as a sound out of place, the kind of thing you notice and then talk yourself out of, because nothing that afternoon gave anyone reason to think the worst. It was not until investigators later lined up the timestamps from the surveillance footage that the sound was placed at approximately 5:08 in the afternoon, sitting squarely inside the window between James arriving and leaving. What happened inside that house during that hour is not something this account will describe in detail. What can be said plainly, because it is what the evidence ultimately showed, is that both Gigi and Steve were fatally shot sometime during that same window. 2 children who had spent that morning like any other were gone before the afternoon was over, and the person who had walked toward that house with intent was already 3 streets away by the time anyone realized something was wrong. The next 2.5 hours would pass with no one aware of what had happened inside that house. Around 7:20 that evening, Gigi and Steve's mother walked back through the front door, expecting the ordinary end to an ordinary day. Noise, mess, 2 kids who had spent their afternoon exactly the way kids do in the summer. Instead, the house was silent in a way it never was. What happened in the next few minutes is not something this account needs to describe in detail. She found both of her children unresponsive inside the house and called 911 immediately. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, but there was nothing left for them to do. Both Gigi and Steve were pronounced dead at the scene. In the space of one afternoon, a household of 3 became a household of 1. There is no version of this moment that needs embellishment. The facts alone carry the weight, and they are the reason this case would go on to consume an entire county's attention for weeks afterward. If a case like this is holding your attention right now, staying with the details rather than looking away, that is exactly why this channel exists. Subscribing helps us keep covering cases like this one thoroughly, all the way through, not just the headline. In the days after July 7th, investigators were not working from a single lead. They were assembling a case out of several independent threads, each one gathered separately, none of them depending on the others to be true. That is what eventually made the case against Keith James difficult to argue with. It was not one piece of evidence carrying the entire weight. It was 4, layered on top of each other, reinforcing rather than repeating. The first was testimony, the friend who had been present on that July 4th call and could describe both the handgun and the threat directly to investigators. The second was digital, the message recovered from Gigi's phone that matched what the friend had described almost exactly. On their own, either of these could be challenged. A memory can be questioned under pressure. A single message can be explained away or taken out of context. Together, they corroborated each other in a way neither could manage alone. The third and fourth threads came from entirely outside the house. Cell phone location data placed a device belonging to James in the immediate area during the window investigators cared about most. Independent of that, MTA and neighborhood surveillance cameras placed him physically on the ground, arriving and leaving along the routes already established. Investigators also recovered ballistic evidence from the scene, which forensic analysts later used to connect the weapon involved directly to James, closing the last gap between presence and involvement in the crime itself. 4 separate categories of evidence, gathered through 4 separate methods, all converging on the same person, during the same narrow hour, without a single one needing the others to hold up on its own. On July 21st, detectives sat down with James directly, giving him the chance to account for himself before anything was made public. He did not deny knowing Gigi. He confirmed the two of them had been in contact for roughly 2 months, and he confirmed he had seen her on July 4th. But when asked about July 7th specifically, he told detectives that July 4th was the last time he had seen her, and that he had not been back to the house since. That statement did not hold up against what investigators already had in hand. Phone records and surveillance footage placed him at the house that same afternoon, arriving and leaving inside the exact window that mattered most. His own account and the physical evidence could not both be true, and the evidence, unlike memory or testimony, was the part that was not going anywhere. Chief Robert McCullough would later point to the broader infrastructure that made a case like this buildable at all. Baltimore County had invested heavily in camera coverage across the community, to the point where, in his words, it is difficult to move through the county without passing in front of one. That investment did not solve the case on its own. It did what surveillance is meant to do in an investigation like this: close the gaps between what witnesses remembered and what could actually be proven in a courtroom. By the time detectives left that July 21st interview, they were no longer looking for a suspect. They already had one, and the following day, they would act on it. On the morning of July 22nd, Baltimore County detectives moved. Armed with a search warrant and an arrest warrant, they took Keith James into custody at an address in West Baltimore. 2 weeks after the case had begun, and 1 day after his own account had failed to hold up against the evidence, it ended with detectives standing at his door. He was charged as an adult. 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Gigi and 1 for Steve, along with a firearms charge tied directly to the weapon investigators had connected to the scene. He was held without bail at the Baltimore County Detention Center, a decision that reflected both the severity of the charges and the strength of the case already built against him. That evening, Chief Robert McCullough stood before reporters at the Randallstown Community Center, flanked by County Executive Catherine Klosterman and Councilman Julian Jones, to announce the arrest publicly.
Good afternoon. I'm Chief Robert McCullough of the Baltimore County Police Department. I'm here with County Executive Catherine Klosterman and County Councilman Julian Jones. This evening, we'd like to announce that we've made an arrest in the July 7th homicide involving Giovanna, Myrie, and her brother, Steve Allen. If you remember back on that date, the homicide occurred in the 6100 block of Tallis Road, in which the brother and sister were murdered. We have arrested a Keith Maurice Jones Jr., who's 16 years of age, who has an address in West Baltimore in Baltimore City. He was taken into custody early this morning by Baltimore County detectives when they served a search warrant and an arrest warrant for him. He's charged with the homicide of both victims. Right now, what we can tell you is that this individual was known to our 15-year-old victim and also to her 9-year-old brother. He's right now being held at Baltimore County Detention Center with bail denied. With that, I'll next have County Executive Catherine Klossmeyer speak, and then Councilman Jones, and then I'll step back up and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chief. I just would like to say how sad a day like today is, and please keep the families in your prayers. And I am so happy with not with the results, but I am so pleased that the police department did such a great, quick job to this part of the whole situation. So thank you, police officers, if you're in here, and thank you, Chief, very, very much. So thank you.
Again, I'm Councilman Julian Jones. I am just taken back by the fact that young people at the age of 16 years old will not only have access to a gun, but have the propensity to actually murder someone and murder two people. So this is an absolute sad day for all of us here in our community, in our country, that this type of violence takes place and is being perpetrated by young people. But at the same time, I want to thank our police department, who work extremely hard each and every day to have a very, very high clearance rate in Baltimore County. I've said it before, I said it again, we can't stop random acts of violence, but just trust and believe that when these violence is perpetrated here in Baltimore County, we will not leave any stones unturned before we make an arrest and take that person to justice. So thank you so much.
And once again, I like to reiterate what the county executive and the councilman said. We can't say enough good things about our detectives and our investigators, and that also includes our crime lab and the people who work in our crime lab for the great work that they did in this case. From the very beginning, we were very diligent, and we pursued the suspect in this case. I know it took much longer than I wanted it to. However, we had to make sure that we put together a very airtight case, considering the age of the suspect in this case, and with recent changes in law in the state of Maryland. We had to make sure that we did our work the right way, the way that we always do. Also, this case also highlights for me a couple issues. One is juvenile violence itself, just violence by juveniles on other juveniles. And it also highlights the point that as parents, we need to make sure that we know who our kids are associating with. We also need to make sure that when we go to work or we go out of the house, that we know who are coming and going in our homes, especially who are with our kids when we're not around. And the final issue is just dating violence, teen violence, between people who have relationships. So we need to be mindful of those things. And with that, I'll take questions. Kyrie?
Yeah, so the rider for what you just said, forgive me if you mentioned it earlier, can you confirm that the 15-year-old was dating Jones or dated them at one point? Was it an ex-boyfriend or a current?
What I can say is that we knew that they knew each other, that there was some type of friendship or relationship there.
Any idea on what Jones's motive may have been?
At this point, we do not have any confirmed motive for the reason he did it.
And what led investigators to Jones? How were you all able to track him down?
I can't go into all those details right now. Much of that will be in the charging document. You'll eventually, I'm sure, have access to the charging document. But what I'll say is excellent police work. We utilize all technology, everything possible. I've said it before. One of the great things is that our administration and our county council have invested in the police department, invested in the infrastructure of Baltimore County. You can't go anywhere and not be on camera in Baltimore County. You can't go anywhere and not be seen.
Will you be charged as an adult? Can you tell us the charges?
Yes, he has been charged as an adult. I don't have the charges in front of me, but I know that, that one of the charges at least will be, murder. He was charged with homicide.
You said it took you longer than you anticipated to make this arrest, but yet the arrest came. The murder notwithstanding, how troubling was this case for you and police?
I think if you go back and look at the video from that night, I didn't even realize it till I looked later. I mean, how troubling it was showed in my face and my demeanor that night. It's troubling when you consider how horrific this crime was carried out. It was terrible, and when you reflect on the fact that a child who had just turned 16 carried out this crime and did it in the manner and the way that he did, it's troubling.
And in terms of, I know it's an ongoing investigation, we can wait for the charging documents, but if you could share what you can, in terms of, you mentioned that parents should know, or something you said about their children and their dating. How long had they been dating, and what was the nature really of that relationship?
I don't have any information as it relates to that. I can't confirm whether they were truly dating or whether they actually just knew each other, but I knew they were known to each other and they had some type of relationship.
Last question here. The 9-year-old, he was there. He obviously wasn't dating the boy. Why the 9-year-old a victim?
Well, I mean, I can only speculate that he was a witness. He was an innocent bystander, and he was the result of everything that went on or transpired that day.
Was this teen suspect known to police prior to this? Any, past situations with law enforcement, that kind of thing?
With Baltimore County, I don't believe so. I mean, of course, in the beginning of the investigation, he came to our radar and was one of several suspects in this case, and we were able to determine that he was the one that carried out the crime.
Are you able to talk a little bit about the circumstances that led up to the shooting? Had he been in the home, had he been spending time there before the shooting took place? Or?
All I can say is we do know that he had been at the home before, maybe even several days prior, that we can confirm, at least on, to our knowledge, July 4th, that he had been at that location.
I was told by neighbors that there was a big party too on July 4th at that location. So, was he known to the parents? Like parents knew who he was and everything?
I can't confirm that, but it's possible that he was known to them.
Chief, a quick follow-up. You mentioned that that night you were very confident by saying, we have a suspect. We have a suspect. Did you know that night that he was the one you were looking for? Let me rephrase that. What led you to him?
I will say that we had a belief that there was a definite suspect. We didn't have a definite identity, but we had an idea of who it might have been. And basically, we followed the evidence. We utilized all the technology that we had available to us. We utilized witness statements to us. We utilized everything that was made available to us to lead us to this suspect.
Chief, obviously, this sent a lot of shockwaves through the community. The funeral was yesterday. This really had a lot of people, you were emotional about it, impacted us as well. What do you say to the community tonight, now that you have this big break in the case, this arrest that happened, what do you say to the community tonight that, may still be, still is shaken up by all of this, just on the human side of things?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, my heart goes out to the family and friends of the victims. Like I said that night, 2 lives were lost. These are lives that will never be realized, a brother and a sister. What I would like to say to the community is that Baltimore County is still a great place to live, work, and play, and to raise your children or for your kids to go to school. These things happen. They happen everywhere across our nation. They rarely happen in Baltimore County when you consider, we have a population, of about 850,000 people, and on any given day you have well in excess of 1 million people that travel throughout this county and come here and work. And all of last year, we had 28 homicides. And as of this point, we're halfway through July, and we only have 12 homicides this year. So it's a great place to live. It's a place that's safe to live. The real issue is the number of guns that have proliferated our society, the availability of guns, the need to make sure that we lock up our guns in our homes. But we want people to know that Baltimore County is safe. We want the citizens and residents of Baltimore County to know that they can depend on their police department when something happens, that the incredible men and women that work in the Baltimore County Police Department will respond, and we will catch our suspect.
I just want to reconfirm, you said he will be charged as an adult, at least 2 counts of murder.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Do you know how he got access to a gun?
No, we do not.
Was he caught on camera? Leaving the house and that kind of thing, Chief?
I would say that he was on camera in several ways throughout the community.
That night.
Say again?
That night, because I know you said you'd been in the area.
He had been in the area prior to the crime, and of course he was in the area after the crime. Any other questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chief.
On July 23rd, one day after his arrest, James made his first court appearance by video link at Baltimore County District Court. His attorney, Brian Thompson, did not contest much that day. What he did ask for was a transfer, requesting that James be held in a juvenile facility rather than an adult detention center while the case moved forward. Thompson also indicated he might revisit the bail question later, once more of the evidence against his client became clear to the defense. The judge said no to the transfer request. The decision came down to two things: the severity of the charges against him and the question of public safety. 2 counts of first-degree murder are not treated lightly, regardless of a defendant's age, and the judge was not willing to soften the terms of his custody early in the case. James was ordered held without bail, and through his attorney, he entered a plea of not guilty. For weeks after that, the case moved the way most serious cases do, out of public view, through paperwork and procedure rather than headlines. Then, in late July, a Baltimore County grand jury reviewed the evidence investigators had assembled and formally indicted James. Beyond the 2 counts of first-degree murder, the indictment added 3 separate weapons-related charges tied to the firearm used in the killings, expanding the case considerably beyond what he was originally arrested on back in July. That indictment matters more than it might sound like on the surface. It is not simply another procedural step. It is the point where a case stops being built entirely by police and prosecutors behind closed doors and starts being formally reviewed by an independent grand jury, the mechanism that decides whether enough evidence exists to proceed to trial at all. With this indictment, the case has now moved out of district court and into Baltimore County Circuit Court, the venue where it will remain through jury selection, pretrial motions, and eventually trial itself. No trial date has been set as of this video. James remains in custody. The original charges stand alongside the new ones added by the grand jury, and the case is still, by every official account, active. Beyond the charges and the courtroom, this case raised questions Baltimore County officials addressed directly, questions that reach well past this one family. Chief Robert McCullough spoke about teen dating violence as its own category of concern, distinct from the broader conversation about youth crime. He pointed to something specific. Parents often do not know who their children are talking to, especially when an entire relationship exists inside a phone. A connection can build for weeks without a parent ever seeing a name attached to it, let alone a face. Councilman Julian Jones went further, connecting the case to something larger than this one house on Tallis Road. He spoke about the broader proliferation of guns reaching teenagers across the county, arguing that access alone should alarm parents just as much as any single case does. A firearm in the hands of a 16-year-old was not, in his view, an isolated detail. It was a symptom of something wider that Baltimore County would keep confronting long after this case concluded. McCullough also addressed something viewers may not have expected: why the arrest took 2 weeks rather than 2 days. He pointed to recent changes in Maryland law affecting how juvenile suspects are charged, changes that require investigators to build what he called an airtight case before moving. With a suspect this young, there was less room for error and less tolerance for a case that might not hold up later in court. He also offered numbers meant to reassure the county rather than minimize what had happened. 28 homicides across the entire previous year. 12 so far this year, at the halfway point of July. Offered in his own words as the chief's attempt to place one devastating case inside a broader, statistically safer picture of the county he oversees. This case is still moving through the courts, and it will keep moving long after this video ends. If you want to know how it turns out, the verdict, the sentencing, whatever comes next, subscribing is the only real way this channel can bring that update back to you. Days before his 10th birthday, Steve Allen was still a kid figuring out Roblox updates and arguing about basketball with anyone who would listen. Gigi Myrie was still going to karate practice, still working on her golf swing, still the kind of 15-year-old a teacher could rely on without being asked twice. That is who they were before any of this happened. Their funeral was held at St. Casimir Church, and the community turned out in black and yellow, the colors both kids were known for wearing. Classmates filled those pews. So did neighbors who had watched them grow up on that street, and people who had never met the family but came anyway, because the loss reached that far. Keith James is still in custody tonight, awaiting a trial date that has not yet been set. Somewhere in Baltimore County, a mother is living in a house that used to hold 3 people instead of 1. If you want to know what happens when that trial date finally arrives, subscribe now so you are still here when it does. And before you go, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you are watching this from.